Living in this heavenly place would have been the most charming life we could imagine together. I remember the time when we got married and I told Denver, my husband, that we could not be more blessed as to have a future together in the serenity of Belarus. Little did I know that our future in this country was to be bleak and austere. In 1941, just a year after our marriage, the Nazis made their first attack on Belarus, and soon war and murder went rampant throughout the country. We had never imagined life to become so hard. The once vivid place I knew turned into a dark, bottomless hole. We did not know when the war would end, or if we would ever be able to see peace again, as murders were becoming more and more common, making our graceful land turn into mass graves. One night when I was dolefully looking out of my bedroom window to the silence and loneliness of the neighborhood, Denver put his hand on my shoulder, brought himself close to me, and gently started saying, "Lisa, I don't think that there is much left for us here anymore. We have to do something to leave." "Leave? But to where? This place is our home," I said, slightly sobbing to what our home had become. He held my hand and looked right in my eyes and said, "I know it's going to be hard for you. I don't want to leave either. But if we want to live without all these hardships and death, we have to move to somewhere safer." Considering what he just said, I soon realized that to continue staying here would make death inevitable, let alone making our dreams together come true. "If that is the case, Denver, then you're right about moving on to some other place." "Yes, Lisa." He held me into his arms, and while we both looked out of the window, he continued, "We will move on and make a great future in Moscow." After knowing that we will shift to Moscow, I not only started improving on my Russian, but also started building up on my spirits. Since the war spread throughout Belarus, we felt as though our dream broke like shards of glass. But now that my hopes were getting high again, I was collecting all those shards and rebuilding our dream again. After a few days, Denver came to me with a plan about how we will leave while escaping those Nazis. He told me that we will carry enough luggage as to seem we're going to get groceries. Denver arranged with a friend in the Nazi army to show us as prisoners and help cross the border to Smolensk, a city over the outskirts of Russia. From there, we will be picked up by a driver named Alexei, who would take us straight to Moscow. The final obstacle we would have to cross would be a Nazi security check on the outskirts of Smolensk, where we would show ourselves as Russians with fake identity cards and swiftly continue with our journey to Moscow. With a solid plan and our new identity cards ready, we were fully prepared to leave the next morning. During my final night in Belarus, I took a deep look at every single object in my house, as though each one of them had a strong significance, because I had no idea what would happen to our house when we were gone, or whether I would be able to see it again. That night was the toughest that we both ever went through. We comforted each other by giving hopes that a greater future awaits us. The next morning, as per our plan, we left the house, taking hardly anything to the place where we would meet our Nazi friend Frederick. He was a man of average height, had shiny blonde hair, and like most other Nazis, had a strict and rough attitude. The only way Denver got to know him was when he went for his degree in Germany and met him there as a good colleague. Later, Friedrich got impressed with the Hitler regime and joined Nazis, but fortunately agreed to help us escape. So like other Belarusian prisoners he took, Friedrich dragged us into a car which he was driving himself, and after a few minutes stopped at a Nazi camp. He got off and confirmed with his commanding officer to take us as prisoners to Smolensk, and got back in to start driving again. As soon as we were reaching the border to Russia, I took a last look at Belarus. It broke my heart to see how torn down the place had become, and nothing like the lush green land I grew upon. I held hands with Denver, feeling his pulse getting faster, inferring to me that he was as shaken and distressed as I was. After a while, we entered in Smolensk, and Friedrich quickly dropped us off to an open area and left without saying a word. Just a short while later, Alexei the driver drove in, making us assured that everything was going as planned. We sat in the car, and before we could drive to the checkpost, we made sure our identity cards were ready and started speaking in our best Russian. My heart started pounding as we came nearer to the checking station. I just felt like something might not go right, but I kept my spirits high. Denver and I looked at each other and we went right into the check post. A flat-faced officer stared at us and checked our identity cards. He asked us many questions for which he wasn't entirely satisfied with the answers, but to our surprise he let us pass. Just as we were stepping in the car, a whole group of Nazi soldiers came with a pistol on Friedrich's head, implying that they forced him to tell where the presumed prisoners went. Seeing this, Alexei yelled at us to hurry back in the car so that we can quickly drive away. Before we had even moved a muscle, the Nazis started bombarding us with gunshots, but both of us did not stop and we ran to the car, managing to close the door shut. Alexei drove without even realizing how fast he was going, and we were able to outrun the Germans to the area close to Moscow, where they cannot come. A whole wave of relief swept over me, and I felt like I would jump around like a child. However, this was short-lived. When I looked down to Denver, I saw a whole pool of blood in our laps. My excitement dropped as if it fell from a cliff. I tried to check if I had any injuries, and when I looked over to Denver, I saw that he was shot on the waist. I screamed to Alexei to get us to some hospital, while I did my best to stop the bleeding and keep Denver conscious. He was only able to mumble a few words and give a fading smile to me before he went completely unconscious. Alexei was able to find a hospital amidst all this rush, and we got him in as soon as we could. I sat in the waiting room with clothes full of blood, and at that moment I felt like an entire hell just went over me. Burning tears kept falling from my eyes, and I couldn't contain the emotions in me anymore. I just sat there in utter disbelief that our lives had come to such a point. Several minutes later, I heard the door behind me open. My instincts to hear just one good news forced me to get up and be eager to listen what the doctor would say. As much as I wanted to hear him, he delayed himself and finally said, "Ma'am, I'm very sorry to inform you that your husband lost his life due to profuse bleeding." That was it. That was what made me ponder that my life wasn't worth living anymore. This war had infiltrated way too deep in our lives, and it felt as though my weak existence had succumbed under its iniquitous pressure. However, this was also a point in my life where I was faced with two choices: either to just stand there and give up due to my massive loss, or to face my tribulations right in the face and continue to fight for a better life and freedom. And I chose the latter. Several years later, I was living a happy life in Moscow with a sustainable job, a new life partner, and two beautiful children, one of whom I had named Denver. The war was over by then, whilst leaving throbbing and painful mental scars, but nonetheless I did not allow those scars to act as an obstruction to me, because as they say, you can either wear those scars as shackles or you can wear them like jewelry for the rest of your life.